But the idea is that they will be best practice. So any neighbouring church, really from any denomination, come and visit that building and learn from how they've achieved net zero. So we felt it was a really strategic level grant. It was a chance to have a real impact on what was a major social issue in a way that will share best practice with other organisations.
Welcome back to another episode of Beyond Funding. Today we're here with Benefact Trust Director Helen Gray, who's going to talk to us a little bit about how Benefact Trust is responding to social issues. So Helen, thank you for joining us on the podcast today. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
I wondered if we could start off by just talking a little bit about your role as Trust Director at Benefact Trust.
Of course. So I joined Benefact Trust last May, so I haven't been in post quite a year, coming up towards my 1 year anniversary, and I suppose I'm responsible for the strategic direction of the trust and working really closely with amazing colleagues to make sure that our grant making really delivers impact, and it's a really great job to have because of the opportunities it affords us, I think.
I wondered if you could tell us a bit about the social challenges that communities, from your perspective, are facing at the moment from what you've seen.
Yeah, I think there's a lot still emerging and changing, and even though it's been a few years since the height of the pandemic, I think we're still seeing the knock-on effect of that. And there's a lot of social need, and I have to say I think it's generally worsening. So it's a bit of a gloomy landscape at the moment. But things like homelessness is on the rise. Rates of poverty are on the rise. We know that from the Trussell Trust, which is one of the biggest networks of food banks, access to food banks increased significantly last year, and it's increased year on year for several years. I think on top of that, the cost of living crisis is really putting families under huge pressure, and families that were not in poverty before and are in work are now below the poverty line. So it means that too many children are struggling. Too many families are making decisions between heating and eating. Mental health as well. We know about 1 in 4 people will have a mental health problem in any 1 year. And again, COVID affected every single age range, didn't it? The elderly were suffering because they were lonely and isolated, and young people really struggled because they weren't interacting in the way they should. So it affected every generation. And unfortunately, I think that has kind of continued, and things like rates of domestic abuse have also remained fairly high, and drug and alcohol addiction. And I won't go on because it sounds really depressing, but generally I do think social need has worsened.
But there's also possibly that it's being more recognised in some areas as well, which is, on the flip side, if there's more being done, then that's something, isn't it?
Yes, and you're right, people are talking about some of these things more, and I'm sure that can only be a good thing, and hopefully it will encourage people to come forward if they need to access help. And yes, that's where I think as a grant-making trust we can come in and really support some of those people.
What role do you see churches and charities playing in terms of addressing this wider social need?
I think they've got a really, really important role to play. And I worked for a grant-making charity, a different grant-making charity during COVID, during the height of the pandemic. And it was really evident that it was churches and other places of worship, not just Christian, but all faith organisations and charities that really responded quickly. They were in their communities. They could see very, very quickly the need that was emerging. And they responded and they pivoted in a really agile way. And not all organisations can do that. So churches set up food banks, charity groups set up home deliveries to the elderly, they set up befriending services. So many services were fulfilled by the charity, voluntary, civil society and churches. And I think that role is sometimes really underplayed, and it plays a really key role in keeping communities healthy, cohesive together. I think going forwards, their role will continue to be incredibly important. As we've already said, social need is probably worsening. I don't see it getting better in the near future. And so there will be more demand for the support of those charities that are helping people with mental health issues, drug and alcohol addictions. And churches will continue to be, in many cases, one of the first places people turn to for help. And, I see that where I live, that's definitely the case. So, yeah, I think they play an extraordinary role.
I totally agree with you in terms of when I first joined, it was actually at the start of the pandemic. Once we'd launched our Hope Beyond COVID response program, and I was blown away by the level of support that churches are providing and that you don't even know about.
Yeah.
It's things that are going on in the background. As you say, they're there with immediate support that people aren't aware of unless they're sort of actively involved in these areas.
No, I think that's probably true of lots of charities. Unless you were looking for support yourself or for someone in your family, as you say, it runs on in the background. But for the thousands of people who visit a church, whether it's regularly or for a specific type of support, they are providing a lifeline. And I think the role they play is probably really undervalued. And I hope that's something we can do, is just champion that a little bit to make people more aware.
That's where we can support them, isn't it?
Yeah.
So on that note, Helen, what are some of the key issues that the Trust is trying to help address?
So we are a grant-making charity that primarily supports Christian places of worship and charities. But actually, in reality, what that means is we are addressing a really broad range of social need. We are here to support places of worship with a sort of fabric requirements, making sure buildings are accessible and fit for community use. But actually, a large proportion of our grant funding is going to address social need in its broadest sense. So I was really impressed when I joined the Trust just to see the breadth of the grant making. And we've, in the last year, we've awarded grants to address homelessness, food poverty, drug and alcohol addiction, mental health support, human trafficking even. So actually, when I think of any social need, I can probably think of a grant that's been awarded to tackle that particular issue.
How does Benefact Trust stay up to date in terms of the evolving social issues, in your opinion?
I think that's probably one of the greatest challenges actually for any grant making charity, and it's something I'm really acutely aware of. I suppose we do it in a number of ways. I think most of the team probably are across the news. I watch the headlines every single day. I network, I make sure I'm attending other events with other funders, and I listen to what other leading charities are saying. So Trust is, again, a good example. They're regularly talking about social need and the trends they're seeing. And I think so long as we as a trust plug into that information, we will remain abreast of what's happening. And I think that's really, really important part of our role.
Definitely. And I know even from our perspective, from a comms perspective, just speaking to different beneficiaries all the time, and you're constantly hearing about different areas that perhaps you didn't know about before that are, and the need is quite shocking sometimes, but it's fantastic to hear from different people who are the experts in specific areas, and if we can support them, that's fantastic.
And you're right, it's the beneficiaries who are on the ground, they're delivering, they're seeing people face to face, and they're a wealth and a font of knowledge, aren't they?
Definitely. Helen, it would be really interesting to hear from you how the Trust has adapted / evolved its grant making to address this kind of wider social need in recent years.
So I think the Trust has evolved over the years, and something that happened last year, which I think has been a really positive move, there was a strategic review of all the grant programmes the Trust was offering. And just before I joined, so I can claim no credit for this, a couple of new grant programmes were launched. And that was very much in response to feedback the Trust had received from beneficiaries. And one of the new programmes is called Community Impact, and details can be found on our website, but it is all about addressing social needs. So if you're a Christian charity or a place of worship, a Christian place of worship that's supporting the local homeless community or providing, support to families who have children with special needs, whatever it is, that's what that funding's for. It's also there to help support the growth in congregations for churches, and it's broader than just social need, but it's become a really key programme in what we're doing, and I think it's a really important way that we are able to address social need.
And it's been really evident, isn't it, in terms of the amount of applications that we had, that the need really is out there. So it kind of proves that this type of programme is actually really vital.
It's really vital, and I think particularly churches in particular, their role evolves, doesn't it? All the time they're constantly looking out to their community, seeing what they can do to help, and that's where this funding is really, really valuable. And you're right, the number of applications went up really significantly last year, and it just reflects the need out there.
How do we collaborate with other organisations to address social need? I know there's been some specific examples in recent years, and we don't claim to be necessarily the experts, but the partners that we work with are the experts. So that's really important for us, isn't it?
Yeah, and actually I think as a funder it's really important we do everything we can to amplify our impact, and working in collaboration is one really good way of doing it. So there are a couple of quite recent examples. We've worked with the Good Faith Partnership, and they're a charity in their own right, and they worked out a few years ago that with the cost of living crisis, winter was going to be a really serious crunch point for an awful lot of people living in food and fuel poverty. And they've set up a network of over 7,000 warm, safe spaces which are accessed by, I think, about 500,000 people every winter. So we're now in the second consecutive year of supporting them. And that is a huge collaboration. We are one of many, many funders and partners involved in it. But it's a really lovely project because it is a community response to something which is, sadly, I can't see the end of difficult winters for families who are struggling. So that to me is a really good example of where we've been able to come alongside experts in their area, and they've pulled it all together, and it's an amazing outcome, really.
And it just also shows, doesn't it, how everyone can do their bit, and the impact is huge overall, but it's communities and organisations just doing that little bit to support people, isn't it?
It is. And actually I was at an event last year and someone came up to me at the end and they said, oh, my mother-in-law has been to one of the warm spaces, and it was the first time it really sort of brought it to life, actually, how important it is. And I can't imagine sitting in my home not being able to heat it or being on my own. And actually that's what this whole project has, it's helped to tackle: loneliness, isolation, poverty. It's ticking so many really important social need boxes.
Definitely. Helen, it'd be really great if you could tell us a bit about our crisis response grants programme.
So the Crisis Response Programme is a closed grants programme, which means that we've sort of ring-fenced funding to enable the trustees to respond to a crisis, and that may be at home or abroad. And we've debated at length how you define a crisis, and clearly that's a really difficult thing to pin down. But just to give you an example of grants that we've awarded in the last few years, the trustees gave a really significant grant to the Red Cross on the back of the Turkey-Syria earthquake. And while natural disasters do happen around the world, the scale of that was really significant. I think almost 60,000 people died, which is horrendous. So Red Cross are on the ground and they can respond very quickly. So we knew that giving money to the Red Cross would ensure people received humanitarian aid as they needed it. So that was one grant. Closer to home in Ireland, we supported the Red Cross in Ireland. They have a centre set up especially for Ukraine arrivals, and I visited it last year, and it is an inspiring place to be. They support young children who have been really traumatised by what they've been through. They're helping adults resettle in an entirely new community, new culture, and it really is amazing what groundbreaking work they're doing. And here in the UK, we, as I've mentioned, we again have supported the Good Faith Partnership to help open this network of warm spaces for people this winter. And we see that as crisis response because it's sort of exceptional, and it's something that requires a quick turnaround in terms of funding.
And again, it really, really does make it clear how important it is to develop these partnerships, doesn't it? Because as you mentioned, it's getting that money where it's needed as quickly as possible, and these frontline organisations are there responding so quickly, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. So they tend to be on the ground within hours, and it's amazing. You watch the news and they are already there.
Yeah.
And for that we're very grateful, and it's great to be able to support them.
Can you tell me a bit about how a trust is working to tackle climate change?
It's really topical. It's something that we've been discussing a lot with the trustees, and we have supported a number of initiatives over several years now in terms of helping churches become net zero. But actually, there's one grant that we've literally just approved, and it's a really major grant for the Trust, and it's a partnership with the Church of England. They're quite far progressed in their thinking around net zero, and they made a commitment to make all their churches carbon neutral by 2030 or near carbon neutral. And one of their initiatives is to support 60 churches, which they're calling Demonstrator churches. And the idea is that in 2024 and 2025, 30 churches in each year will be supported to become net zero. The Church of England has set aside funding to support them, but it recognises that's not enough to enable those churches to actually deliver what they want to do. So the Trust has made a really significant commitment. It's pledged £750,000 this year and next year to help those 60 churches achieve net zero. And what's really exciting about those 60 churches, they're spread across the UK. They may include church halls as well. But the idea is that they will be best practice. So any neighbouring church, really from any denomination, come and visit that building and learn from how they've achieved net zero. So we felt it was a really strategic level grant. It was a chance to have a real impact on what was a major social issue, in a way that will share best practice with other organisations.
That's really exciting because it goes beyond this partnership, really, doesn't it? And as you say, it's a blueprint for other churches to get involved, do similar things. Yeah. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, no, I think a grant that can have a much wider ripple effect is always a really, really, as you say, it's an exciting opportunity.
What do you see is our aim going forward in terms of the role that we're playing in addressing wider social issues?
At the moment, I can see a lot of it probably worsening before it gets better. So for me, a really important, I suppose, strategic objective is that we grow our grant making. We're already a top 30 grant making charity. I would like us to, be top 15, top 10, but not for the sake of growth, for the sake of actually reaching more people and amplifying our impact and giving out more grants, maybe even bigger grants. But I would just like us to do more, because I think that's how we really make a difference.
Thank you so much for speaking to us, Helen. That's been really, really informative. And I'm sure lots of our beneficiaries have got lots of important information out of that they wouldn't know before. So that's really, really helpful.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for listening to another episode of Beyond Funding. You can find any information about Benefact Trust and our grants programmes on the website at benefacttrust.co.uk. And remember to subscribe to our Spotify and YouTube so you don't miss out on future episodes.